How's it going, everybody? Jay Williamson here, back for another awesome episode of the Ride Along. We have an esteemed UT professor, Mr. Jeff Dickerson. He is a law professor at UT. He's got a lot of great experience. He's a partner at Branscombe Law. And to list off some of his numerous achievements, he's been listed as the best lawyers in America for corporate law, as well as a super lawyer in Texas by Thomson Reuters. He's got a lot of great insight to share about businesses itself, working in law. We're excited to have you here. Thank you very much for coming on.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here. I am first and foremost a lawyer. The teaching part is just something that I get to do. It's definitely a treat for me.
So traveling down that vein, why don't you talk at a high level kind of what your career has looked like in your eyes, maybe summarize a little bit about your career journey.
Well, it was kind of an accidental career. I mean, I didn't set out to be a lawyer. I never thought I would be, but I was sort of at loose ends. After I graduated from the University of Texas with an English degree, I wanted to be an English professor. So I went to graduate school at the University of Virginia. I got my master's there, but as I tell people, through sort of a combination of immaturity and homesickness, I decided that I would come back. I would stop. I don't think I really understood what it meant to be an English professor, what it meant to try to get a PhD. And I was young. I was just turned 24, I guess 23. And I was just, I wanted to come back. I missed Austin a lot. So I came back here and I waited tables for about 3 months. And after that, I thought, okay, I got to do something else, because that's really not, you change. And I had waited tables for a long time, on and off during school, between semesters, and had enjoyed it. And I actually thought that was something I might like to just do, have a sort of a what I thought was kind of a bohemian lifestyle. That I quickly soured on that. And so my dad said, my dad was a lawyer. My dad said, why don't you go to law school? At least even if you don't decide to be a lawyer, you'll know how the world works. And so I was very lucky. I got into UT Law School and graduated in '88 and got a very good job at a good small firm, still around in Houston. The names have changed a little bit in the firm, but started out working there, and it was a very tough time to get a job. So I was very fortunate to get one, and one in the area that I wanted to work in. I never wanted to be a litigator. I never wanted to do trial work. And the longer I've been a corporate lawyer, the less I want to be a trial lawyer, because I think it takes a particular kind of person and be happy at it. I've been a corporate lawyer since I started in 1988 and have really enjoyed it. I do historically, my practice, about half mergers and acquisitions and half of it sort of general counsel work, outside general counsel work for businesses around the state of Texas. And started in Houston in 1992. My wife got out of law school. We moved to Corpus Christi. I've practiced law there for 16 years, and am still with the firm that I joined in December of 1992 in Corpus Christi.
Awesome.
I can monologue forever, so maybe I let you redirect me in case I'm going off track.
Well, no, you're good. I have personal interest. Was it like a famous Austin establishment you worked at as a waiter beforehand, or was it somewhere that's kind of with the times? Maybe was there a specific restaurant you worked at?
It was a pretty 38th Street at the time. It was called Los Tres Bobos. It was the Three Fools, and those guys, the guys who started it. I only remember one of them, but they thought something insane when they started this restaurant, because it was New Mexican style food, and they were probably a little bit ahead of their time. But it was a nice place to work, but it was a waiter job. Right. And not there anymore. It's in the 26-store shopping center, which is still there at 38th and Lamar. And I was there for about 8 or 9 months, and then I moved, or maybe 6 months, and then I moved on from there to another restaurant called the Boston Steamer, sort of a legendary restaurateur here in Austin, a guy named Mark Katz, who owned Katz's Deli on 6th Street for a long time. And then, I was going to law school, so my roommate got married. I couldn't afford the rent anymore, so I moved home to Houston. Didn't really want me around, and so he said, "Well, how about what you ought to do? You ought to have an adventure. You ought to
Okay.
have an adventure in 3 months." And so he said, "Why don't you take this truck we got? I've got the spare Chevy S10. Why don't you take this and drive around the country for about 6 weeks? 6 weeks."
Uh-huh.
So that's what I did. I drove around the country for about 6 weeks, and then I got back. I went to law school.
That's awesome. So walk me through kind of that application process for law school when you were going through it. Is there a lot of similarities to now? Is it almost completely different? Uh,
Um, I I think it's pretty similar.
mhm.
Some differences. I mean, there's a common application now. I don't think we had back then. There's a common application that is used for most law schools.
Mhm.
Back then, you had to apply individually to all the different law schools. All of them had different filing fees, but it's except for that, pretty much the same thing. You
Mhm.
LSAT, you send them your transcript. LSAT's the law school admissions test, um, and then you waited for an answer. And back then, UT was a great school, so I was kind of on pins and needles about it, but I was hoping I would get in because I had the grades and I had the LSAT score that I needed. So that's it. It's pretty much a numbers game applying to law school, and it mostly GPA and LSAT score,
Right.
and it was that way then. It's that way now. The biggest difference I would say between now and then was that back then you just got up in the morning on a Saturday and you went down and took it. And now there are prep courses and books, and there was, to my knowledge anyway, no way to prepare for the LSAT. You just went in and took it.
So has the average scores risen since then? Is it like the number you need to get into UT now look a lot different than it did then maybe, or?
I don't think so. I think the number to get in is probably about the same. I think the test is probably harder though. But I think that's true of all standardized tests.
Right.
As this industry of prep courses for GRE and for the LSAT and even for the SAT has grown up, they've trained these students up so that they're ready
Right.
for what the test is going to bring them. So they make the test harder, which
Mhm.
makes the prep course better, which makes the test harder, which makes the prep course better.
Uh,
That's my guess about what's going on. Yeah.
right. In your experience, and this is something that I'm sure students have asked you before, what do you see as the right time to take the LSAT? Does it really depend on the person, whether they're wanting to work following undergrad? I mean, because there's so many different ages for when someone to go to law school, but in your opinion, what do you see as the premier time?
Well, you know, back when I took it, you just took it once and you just hoped it would work out okay. I think now I see people doing is they'll take it in the summer before their senior year, and then they'll take it again in the fall if they felt like the score they got wasn't quite what they wanted it to be. And I think that's probably a good idea. I think the more mature you are, the better chance you have of doing a good job preparing for it. I know that the person that I was when I took the LSAT was a very different person from the person I was when I was, say, a sophomore, even a junior, obviously. So I think that's it. But you don't want to take it too late because you want to have an opportunity, particularly, I don't think that you're
Mhm.
not quite getting the score you want to get. You might want to set it up so that you've got an opportunity to take it twice. They'll take the highest score that you've got, but you also have deadlines of January 1. So you've got to get that. You can't take the LSAT later than November if that's what you're going to try to do.
When you're walk us through, you're in at UT, you're starting in your law school process. Were you working every summer, looking for law internships? Kind of, what did that stage look like for you? That process.
Well, I think that actually we were a little bit more fortunate back then than students are now. Back then, law firms would interview you
Mhm.
in the spring if you were first year for jobs in the summer. Now I think there are a lot fewer jobs after the first year, a lot fewer law firm jobs.
Mhm.
So, which is fine because, you know, if you the whole idea behind internships is that they are gateways to a job at that firm. You
Right.
probably don't need to clerk at the same firm 2 summers in a row. You know, you just really need to do it once. And so it
Mhm.
was great for me because I got paid. I actually was one of the people that got a job that summer and felt pretty fortunate to have it, and then another one. But, you know, it was a lot cheaper to go to law school too. So one of the things that, particularly a law clerk job, which paid better than almost any other kind of job, was that it helped pay your tuition. Back then, I think, if I remember right, all through law school and fees total were $500 a semester.
My goodness.
And
Wow.
that was double what it was when I was an undergrad, which was $250 a semester. Yeah.
How the times have changed.
How they have changed indeed. Yeah. So anyway, the way that what you're doing really is you have to give it your all your first year, because it's your first year grades, the grades that you get in May, you know, or from the exams you take in May, uh,
Mhm.
that are going to be determinative of who you can interview with
Mhm.
in the fall. It's entirely, pretty much entirely up to the law firms who they want to interview, and they pick you based on your grades.
Right.
They don't have any other criteria to judge you from.
Mhm.
And so, you know, when I was recruiting, and we did a bunch of that, you know, at my firm for a long time, that's what you were looking for. You were looking for the best grades. And
Mhm.
so that job, I mean, that interview in the fall of your second year of law school gets you your summer job, and your summer job is the job that, and there you may have 2 or 3 clerkships in the summer. Those are the clerkships that lead you to your permanent job, or at least your first permanent job.
Right. So yeah, that's kind of the trail I want to go down. As you graduated law school, you're getting those first permanent jobs. You know, we kind of touched on that a little bit with you, but why don't we go a little bit more detail about what your first permanent law job looked like, kind of what your day-to-day functions were, as well as maybe, you know, what made you decide on that firm?
Well, what made me decide on that firm was that they were the only one to offer me a job. You know, so that was a pretty easy call for me. I had a very unusual sort of experience at UT though, and at least unusual for people who got a job at a really good firm. I ended up at a really top boutique law firm that is now called Schlanger, Silver, Barg, and Payne in Houston, and they did, at the time, they were largely real estate focused with a corporate section uh, that also worked behind them, and then had some litigators too. And so about a 25 person firm, and now I think they're a little bit more diverse in terms of the range of their practice, but still great lawyers. And a lot of the guys that I knew then are there. What I wanted to do, I wanted to be a corporate lawyer because that that would, you know, connect me the most with business people, that I would be working to help businesses and help them grow, and those people would become my, you know, my long-term clients. And that's pretty much how it worked at that firm. The corporate section was a little bit in service to the real estate developer clients that we had, and so you did a lot of work with real estate developers. After I left there, I really ended up with a far more diverse practice,
Yeah.
uh, sort of accidentally, in Corpus Christi, and did really, you know, some pretty decent sized deals for working in a sort of a mid-sized town like that. But that was my goal. My goal was to work, you know, in business work,
Mhm.
not to do trial work. A lot of it's very combative and
Right.
stressful. Like
Mhm.
corporate work stressful in a different way.
Right. And there's, you know, from reading and stuff and just things I've heard across college and whatnot, there's sometimes this negative perception people have of trial lawyers, especially business groups across the country. Where do you think that comes from? And has that been, I mean, that seems like something that's been going on for quite a while and has really been picking up in intensity in some states.
I think that's definitely true. I think part of what the reason for that is twofold. One is that starting in the 80s and really flourishing in the 90s and since then, uh, there's developed kind of an industry of plaintiff's law.
Right.
And I don't think that's an unfair characterization of it. You
Mhm.
know, it used to be that litigators did all kinds of different things, but what has grown up over the last, 3 or 4 decades has been there are lawyers who just sue patients if they can, if they're lucky enough to get these kinds of cases on big toxic torts and other kinds of large scale litigation, whether it's not just toxic torts. There was a big industry for that in the 90s around tire tread separation, and so tire manufacturers were a big target for a long time. People with really horrific injuries or long-term bad diseases, and there's a lot of money in those cases. And I think so. I think that there's a lot of business perceives that law has gone from being a sort of a gentlemanly profession to an industry in which some participants can make a whole lot of money. And I think that's right. I mean, I think that's accurate. I will say the plaintiffs' lawyers that I know really believe in what they do. And they we don't have the regulatory state that some nations have in terms of ensuring the safety of our citizenry generally. At least that's the perspective of the plaintiffs' lawyers, and so they feel like they are sort of the last
line of defense.
Yeah, they're the last line of defense. They're the guardians of the people, and there's a diversity of opinion out there about that, but that is one thing that's going on. I think the other thing that a lot of people in business don't like is the fact that litigation has just gotten ugly.
Right. That's a good point.
Again, used to be a more gentlemanly profession. Now, I think, one of the things that's tough about the American legal system is that it is not an inquisitorial system. It is an adversarial system.
Right.
And one of the things that you're charged with as a lawyer is to be a zealous advocate for your client. And that excuses, in the minds of some people, a lot of really, really bad behavior. To have your honor torn down, to have your talents questioned, all of those things are tough.
Right.
And some fair inquiry, and sometimes it's not.
So, to maybe backtrack a little bit, when you had gotten started in Houston, did you come in at the associate level? Or like I guess another question is kind of, when do you start bringing in your own clients, and how does that really work? Are you introduced to people from your firm already? Because, eventually you said you moved off to Corpus Christi, and that's kind of when you started, getting your own larger acquisitions and whatnot. How does that really work for someone? Because it seems like it's a lot of like a you eat what you kill kind of game.
Well, I've been very fortunate to not work in environments like that, which you kill. I've always worked for a firm. It's never been smaller than 12 or bigger than 70. Our firm was much larger at one time, and then a large group of people split off in the mid 90s. But to tackle your question directly, you get out of law school, and what's surprising is how little you know. I mean, you deserve to be an associate. You have this knowledge, but you don't have a lot of judgment, and you don't have much experience. I was an English major and knew very little about business, and I learned on the fly. So you start as an associate, and you do the work that you were given. The idea that you can generate work for the firm yourself when you're young and don't know anything is one of the biggest myths. And I always try to disabuse young lawyers of the need to do that. They come in and they say, I'm going to contribute, I'm going to bring work in. You can't inspire confidence because people can tell you don't know anything. You really don't have the ability to bring in clients. Plus, when you're young like that, what you tend to do is you bring in clients at your age and younger, because your contemporaries hire you mostly. People who consider you to be, have some gray hair, they want to hire you, but people who are 50 years old don't want to hire a 25-year-old person, and who clearly doesn't know what they're doing. So, I mean, I think that's a big myth, and it does a disservice to young lawyers, because what they ought to do is go in and learn their craft, and they ought to seek all the opportunities they can to be introduced to the best clients of the firm, and they ought to try to inspire confidence. And once you begin to inspire confidence, the clients of the firm and the lawyers in your firm will be your best clients.
Right.
And then those people, if they are successful, they will tell their friends about you.
Mm-hmm.
And what you like to have are successful clients who have successful friends, because they're likely to be good clients too.
Right.
So it's actually, developing business is not as hard as it seems like it's going to be, particularly for people who are not super outgoing. I'm an introvert. I feel very comfortable talking to people, but it takes me a lot of energy. I wear out a little bit, and I don't want to have to take people to lunch all the time. And the truth is, I don't think I've ever gotten a client from taking anybody to lunch. I got the clients that I've gotten because I did good work for either
Yeah.
them or somebody else.
Mhm. So then kind of what is that level of when you say, okay, this person, they're ready to start getting clients? Is there really a level? Is it kind of a per person? You see how hard they work over a set number of years?
I think it depends to some extent on
Mm-hmm.
so, for instance, an estate planning and probate lawyer, it may take you a little while longer to get clients, because people don't really start estate planning in earnest until they get into their, you get a lot of your clients from contemporaries. They need to get where they have some and make sure that that plan is in place. Some of it depends on luck. I met my oldest client when I was 32 years old. My father was his lawyer, and my stepfather didn't. Not my stepfather. My father-in-law. My father-in-law was his lawyer, and I knew some things about securities law that my father-in-law didn't know from having practiced in Houston. I started out. I was doing public offering work when I left Houston and came to Corpus, and so um, I got put in front of a guy that was successful, but going to be even more successful. He's my oldest client, and I've been very, very fortunate to be hitched to his wagon all this time, because he and the other people that he has introduced me to have been the engines of my success. I've just tried to do as good a job for them as I could. And
So
I've been very lucky.
what do you see as the major difference? I know we talked about this taking out people to lunch kind of thing. When someone reaches the partner level at a firm, is it just a lot more being a leader, and is there as much day-to-day minutia as you normally would have as the associate level? Like, are you administering tasks to the people below you? Does it depend on the size of the firm?
It depends a lot on the size of the firm. I think really big law firms, the law firms that like Locke, Lord, Vincent and Elkins,
Right.
Norton, Rose, Fulbright, those firms, they have more tiers to them, and you start out as sort of a foot soldier, and then you get to a point where at 4, 5, 6 years in, you know how to do a particular task, and you were assigned to do it all the time. The hours become very intense at that point. Um, then there's another level above that, and then maybe another level above that, depending on the firm. And yes, the more senior you get, the more you are delegating
Mhm.
at those size firms, and the more you are controlling. If you're doing M&A work, 5, 6, 7 deals at a time, and only stepping in to deal with the big issues. That's never been my practice. I've always worked at smaller firms,
Mhm.
and I've only worked at 2 firms, and
Right.
they've been smaller, and the structure is very flat. I've had at most, one associate working under me, maybe 2, uh, and how much I work depends on how experienced they are.
Right.
A lot of turnover in the law profession, and there are a lot of people who are not suited for it. So you can hire somebody and they get started and they don't like it.
Mhm.
They leave.
Right.
And now it's the amount of work that you use on the kind of work, and um,
So what can we talk about how there's people that know?
I can elaborate on that a little bit, but I don't want to go on too long. I'm
Well,
sorry. Go ahead.
it kind of tailors into a next point is do you think there's a specific skill that is the most important in someone wanting to become a lawyer? Is it hard work? Is it just, never knowing when to say no? or is it kind of too hard to quantify something like that? And if there
I
is,
think
what would you see it being?
uh, I think that the most successful lawyers I know have a couple of characteristics. That, you got to be smart,
Mhm.
and um, but being smart is the price of admission. That's all that gets you in.
Mhm.
The other things you have to do, you have to be willing to work really hard and learn your craft. And it's it's one thing to work hard for like 1 year, get those good first year grades, and
Right.
then sort of lay
Coast.
back. Another thing to just do it for years and years and years. And the best lawyers I know are very, very, very client focused, and that means when the client needs you, you do it, you work. And um, and it doesn't mean your life has to be bad, but I was able to pretty much arrange my life so it was 8:30 to 6:30 most of the time, unless I was working on a deal. And if I was working on a deal, the hours were different.
Right.
Um, so it's work ethic, it's intelligence. I think you have to care about the client too. I think the best, and of course, let's remember that there are two kinds of clients. If you really want to divide it just in half, and that means that there are public clients, there are public company clients, large companies that where a lot of the time as a lawyer, no matter how senior you are not really working with the highest levels
Mhm.
of management. You are working with middle management, high middle management. Then there's private clients, and that's been my experience. I've worked in the private client world my whole life, and that has been um, that means that I'm working with the owners.
Right.
And for me, that's a lot of fun because I'm working with decision makers and they need my help and they trust me for a lot. And being relied on like that's very rewarding. So, uh, caring about your client, caring about the person who's the client, and
Mhm.
that really matters. That's public codes or whether you're working for a private clients.
Right.
Caring about those guys is a big, big part of it.
Mhm. In your own experience, when you're working with clients, is there a lot of times to where you just kind of communicate them on a person-to-person level, not even talking business, not even talking shop, or is it really you try to keep it as strictly professional as possible?
Now, for me, I know the private, I know some of the private life of my client, and it's up to them to tell me.
Right.
But I'm interested in what's happening with them, and particularly as a corporate lawyer, one of the things that you develop is a wide range of experience in a lot of different areas. So it's one of the things that's fun about it. Is a labor lawyer usually pretty much knows labor and employment law. An estate planning lawyer may know some stuff about law, but corporate lawyers have to work in a lot of different areas because they're working. If you're working with management, they're coming to you and they're saying, I have a problem with these employees or these managers. I have this problem with real estate that we need to deal with. We need to borrow some money, so I need a guy who can do some borrowing work. Structures that you have to understand that stuff too. So um, all of that leads to you getting a pretty wide range of experience, and so you're asking the client, have you thought about estate planning? You know,
Mhm.
they want to buy a.
Hey, everybody, little technical difficulties, but we are back in action. So, one other question I had, Professor, is what do you see as the evolution of law? Do you think there's going to be really any changes over the next 5 to 10 years? Because obviously, technology has played a big role probably the last 20 years, but do you think there's going to be any formative changes that come, whether policy-wise or anything like that in the future?
Well, what I see, I think in terms of the practice of law, I think big firms will get bigger. I think that medium-sized firms over about 30 or 40 lawyers will continue to phase out. There are just obstacles to small firms, medium-sized firms, uh, mostly just overhead, and the cost per lawyer is too high to justify staying together given the size of the litigation and the
Mhm.
deals that you can get. But I always think there's going to be room for the private client law firm because I think there are private clients who are looking for a relationship with the lawyer that that they can't get
Mm-hmm.
usually at a big firm, in part because the rates of big firms are so high.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lawyer who a few years ago left a big law firm. Big law is a term, it's really, really large firms, big law firm, who he left because nobody locally could afford his $800 an hour rate.
Uh-huh.
And he wanted to work locally. He didn't want to travel all the time, and he wanted to work for people, because that's just more satisfying.
Right.
So I think those kinds of clients will be around, and those kinds of law firms will be around. But I do think that big law firms will continue to succeed. But I don't know. I think that's the big thing. I just hope we can maintain some level of professionalism. I think the size of firms and the zealous advocate problem that I mentioned earlier does tend to lend itself to less collegiality than we used to have.
Yeah. What do you think will be the overall implications for the trade if you have these kind of big firms that are just dominating everything and you see more and more smaller ones disappearing?
Well, I honestly think that there's more satisfaction for the private client oriented lawyer. You're probably happier there. What you have to get used to is the idea that there is a limit on how much money you can make selling your time
Right.
by the hour
Mm-hmm.
with private clients. And it's not that you don't have a very nice life, because you do, but the kind of money that big law firms pay for lots and lots of hours or lots and lots of business getting ability
Mm-hmm.
is not available to smaller law firms, and you just have to understand that. But I think there's a lot of satisfaction at this level where I practice that I wouldn't give up. I wouldn't give up. I think that's the main. I think that's the main thing. I also think you're going to see a lot fewer people making partner at big firms. I think big firms, over the last 30 or 40 years, particularly the last 20, have changed their attitude about up and out, which is what it used to be. And now it will be possible to work at a large law firm in a non-equity position and in effect have tenure there.
Right.
You can stay, but you can't make $1 million a year.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's the biggest difference, the biggest trend coming, at least on a personal level.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to where we are today and over the last 6 months, have you really seen what have you seen the pandemic affect you in your day-to-day? Has it really affected it overall? Do you think there's going to be any substantive changes that are going to impact the industry from coronavirus?
Less work.
Less work.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've all seen it, and big firms and small firms alike. With decline in business, big firms have done some massive layoffs. I can't speak for all small firms. We have not laid anybody off, but we all have, taken pay cuts, and we're working hard to keep our staff and haven't laid off any staff. But I think, I mean, it's just a downturn, that any kind of massive uncertainty like this. I saw it, I've been practicing so long, I saw it back in 1992. And, as we came out of the savings loan crisis and came into the early 90s, a lot of money was just, being sat on. People were sitting on their hands waiting to see what happened next. And there was a downturn then.
So to not take too much of your time, I have two final questions. And the first one being, you have a lot of people in college who obviously, they don't necessarily know what field they want to go into. They don't know if they want to get an MBA, the law degree, or something like that. And so for students who say, okay, I don't want to maybe practice law, but I want to get a law degree, do you think there's validity to that and that that's a good idea to get into or something like that? Or do you think that you get your more bang for your buck when you're actually going into it with the intention to practice?
Well, I think there's a difference of opinion about that, and reasonable minds can differ on it.
Right.
For me, I think that getting a law degree should be for lawyers. And I don't mean that the legal profession needs it. I mean that if you don't want to practice law, that's an awful long time to spend a whole lot of money to learn really the basics, of law. And also the law curriculum is relatively broad. And so, you come out knowing not much about a whole lot. And so I would generally not advise people to go to law school if they didn't plan on practicing law because of the bang for the buck problem that you
Yeah,
mentioned. Yeah.
right. So our final question, this is kind of a tradition on here, is to kind of ask if you could go and look across your whole career and give like a token line of advice to your 18-year-old self or just to an 18-year-old who has no idea what they want to do. They think they may be interested in law or something. What would that token statement be?
That statement would be take your time. I think that, and I actually do tell this to every student I talk to, just
Right.
about
So
whether
yeah,
they
you put
want to
this
hear it,
actually into practice.
yeah, whether they want to hear it or not. I
Right.
think that today's student is in a huge hurry to
Hmm.
get out and establish themselves in a career.
Hmm.
And you don't know yourself well enough at most people don't at the age of 20, 21, 22 to be certain as to what your career is going to be. I'm not saying don't go pick something challenging, pick it. Just don't, if that's what you want to do.
Hmm.
But if you don't know what you want to do, don't beat yourself up about it.
Right.
It takes a while to figure that out. And most of the people I know, my college friends, we're all still friends. The guys I met, the women I met in the dorm at Jester
Hmm.
and Jester Center here at the UT campus in 1979. Those people all ended up being very successful people,
Hmm.
but it took them a while to find that spot.
Right.
And uh, do not rush. You've got plenty of time.
Hmm. Well, thank you again for taking the time to speak to us. I know I appreciate it. I'm sure everyone else that's listening will appreciate it. Once again, we thank you guys, listeners. Look forward to the next couple episodes we have coming up. More exciting stuff on the way. Thank you very much.
Very glad to help. All right. Thanks, Jay.